Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our third installment of our webinar on decision making to the drought. I'm Melody Benjamin. I'm the staff for the Cow-Calf Council. Al Adkins was on his way home from a track meet and didn't make it home, so he asked me to step in and welcome you all. Yes, we are talking about drought, and everyone's had a little bit of precipitation across, not everyone, but several people across the state. But likely this drought's not over. And we want to make sure that you have the information you need in case you have to make some decisions. We've heard from a lot of producers that said, well, I made it through 2012, but every drought's different and every market's different. And so we decided to focus on the markets of what was going on to help you make those decisions. We look forward to the questions tonight, and I'm going to turn it over to Benita so she can do a little bit of housekeeping with you before we get started.
So we do invite you to ask your questions, and how you can do that tonight is in the Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen. If you just type your question in, we will get those answered, and Jed and Kenny are going to be answering your questions as you go. So as you think of them, get them typed into that box. If they don't notice them, we'll raise their awareness and get the question asked to them. If you do have any problems this evening, you can text me. My email was, or my text number was on the email, but it is 402-450-0223. So if you need it, need any help, please let me know. We will be recording the webinar, and it will be posted on our website. I'm going to turn it over here to Jed and Kenny with Commodity Solutions to present our webinar this evening. They're a guaranteed introducing broker that specializes in agriculture futures and options. They serve clients throughout Nebraska as well as the Midwest, including a full service brokerage firm specializing in agriculture futures and options. Jed is involved in the Nebraska grain and feed industry for over 20 years. He's a 2000 grad of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Kenny Prince is a feed ingredient merchandiser with Commodity Solutions. He's a graduate from the University of Nebraska with a degree in animal science. I want to thank you both for taking time out of your busy schedule and being here with us tonight. I will turn the floor over to you.
All right, thank you, Benita. Tonight's part 3 is feed price outlook and will there be byproducts available? I'm Jed Christensen. This is Kenny Prinz. As Benita just kind of read, just a little bit about us. We're a commodity brokerage firm that also spends a lot of time trading feed ingredients, dried distillers grains, soybean meals, pretty much anything that you can put in a truck, all the byproducts throughout Nebraska and in the Midwest. There's a good chance that we'll trade them. Our clients would include feed mills, cattle producers, pretty much anybody who uses feed byproducts in the livestock and grain industry. Our locations, these are our locations. Some of you on the call here might do business with us, and we appreciate that. And if you don't, and there's anything that we can do for you, feel free to reach out to one of our locations. We thought we'd start this evening just looking at the drought, where we've come from. We have two, this is compliments of the UNL Drought Monitor. We have 2 pictures here on the screen. The one on the left is the most recent that's been published from as of May 10th, 2022. The one on the right, we went back about 2 months, and it's from March 15th, 2022. There's been a little bit of change in the drought index. As you can see here, today we have a little less drought concerns kind of in the grain growing areas of the country. But if you go back to March 15th, so some of the drought areas, extended all the way up into Wisconsin, Minnesota, even Iowa. But a lot of those areas here have received some moisture in the last month. We're sitting here in Norfolk, Nebraska today, and we just had a small shower roll through. And what did you say we got?
In Humphrey, we had an inch.
Yeah, so down at our Humphrey office, we had about an inch, probably something similar. And so we've received several showers that, as you can see here, we're in Nebraska. We're not out of the woods by any means, but we're getting a few showers that have helped. Again, just here's a bigger picture of the same thing. There are a few areas of Nebraska here that just have missed some of these showers. And we, especially for our western areas of our state, we definitely need them to keep coming. But this is kind of the current condition of the country. If you look out here over to some of the Eastern Corn Belt states, you can see that there's absolutely nothing on the drought monitor for them. In fact, if you look at the latest planting progress, they would be behind a normal planting progress. So we have kind of a tale of two cities this year with probably more than desired moisture in the east. And you can see here the western half really of the whole United States just really is in a drought area. As we go through this year, if you want to watch this, and I think it's released weekly, just Google UNL Drought Monitor, and you can pull it up and kind of watch this change throughout the year. We wanted to start tonight with probably a little bit more on corn, soybean, and wheat grain markets. And even though we're here to talk about byproducts and feed tonight, feed is based, the price of our byproducts and our feed is based on the commodity markets. It's based on corn futures, soybean futures, and wheat futures. And so just kind of helping to give you a picture of maybe why we have $7 to $8 corn today. And, that carries through to the price of the distillers. And so we're going to, first half of our presentation tonight is going to talk about the grain markets. This here is maybe to start with just a few the slides. Some of the slides we're using tonight are compliments of our friends at the USDA. Some of the other charts are also compliments of our clearing firm, R.J. O'Brien. And so we appreciate both of them letting us use some of their data here to present with. But this is corn acres that have been planted and harvested in the United States from 2013 to 2022. So it's going back the last 10 years. And you can see this top line, we've planted as many as 95.4 million acres of corn. And this year, we've planted 89.5 million acres is the planting intentions report from the end of March. We'll see an update to that the end of June. That'll probably be a little more accurate. The USDA in March, it's based on a survey that they do. Since this 89.5 million acres was published, the price of corn is probably a full $1 a bushel higher. Will that buy more corn acres? Considering that that price move happened before the planters ever rolled, we probably have a bias that it is going to buy a few corn acres. will it get us up to the 95.4? That's highly doubtful, but our forecast would be that this 89.5 million acres is going to be the smallest planting acreage on corn that we see for the year. This is corn yield going back to 1992. This is, for those of you that always wonder what they mean by trend line yield, this is the trend line yield. So this gray line here, moving from the lower left to the upper right, is the trend line, and USDA estimates based on trend line yield, they have us at a 177 bushel per acre national yield. So if you take the acres times the yield, that gives total production. This is last year's production. So this is not an estimate of this year, this is last year's. And as you can see here, we grew one of our larger crops that we've ever grown as a nation last year. If you go back to 2016 at 15.1 billion bushel, we matched that last year. So last year's production nationally was really good. We grew a good corn crop last year, and I think that is probably one thing that surprises some of why we have $7 to $8 corn today. It's not from a 2012 type drought. It wasn't from a production shortfall last year, because as you can see here, we in fact had a really good year of corn production. This is the March corn stalks. So this kind of gives you a perspective of compared to other years. We'll look at the most recent one, which is this gray line right here. And the USDA said as of March, our corn stocks was 7.85 billion, which is actually a little bit bigger than where we were at this time last year.
Is that a question? Walked out in the chat box.
We'll see another grain stocks number here in June, I believe. But as you can see by this, the compared to last year, anyway, we actually, according to the USDA, have just a little bit more corn out in the country and in the pipeline than we did a year ago. So again, this is a corn ending stocks, just a little different look. So again, maybe the question is, well, why do we have such high corn price? Well, there's several reasons for that. It's not just the amount of corn we grow as a country, it's the amount of corn we grow relative to how much we're using. So that's what they call a stocks to use ratio. And if you look at our stocks to use ratio here, these data points are much lower than where we've been in several of the last previous years. You have to go back to 2012, 2013 to find similar stocks to use ratio. So it's really the stocks to use ratio that is it being as low as it is really why the markets are nervous about the supply of corn and why we are where we are price wise. So this is a balance sheet. USDA just updated this today, in fact, and You can see here that stocks to use ratio is at 9.6. The carryout number is another number that's commonly watched. What that means is how much corn are we going to have left? How many million bushel or billion bushel are we going to have left at the end of this season? So when we get to the fall, right before the new crop is harvested, we will have 1,440,000,000 bushel of carryout, of carryover stocks. How does that compare to other years? Well, if you look back to 2016 through 2019, some years that we've went through here recently with some lower commodity prices, you can see here in some of those years, we had over 2 billion bushel of carryout. So it is a smaller carryout, and it is a tighter stocks to use ratio. Other numbers on this screen that you might be interested in is, well, who's using it? You know, we kind of went through the acres and the yield and the production that creates in the previous slides. But down here is going to be your demand side of the table. And you can see here that food and industrial, they use 1,405,000,000. Ethanol is a significant user at 5.3 billion is what the USDA says that we're going to use. How does that compare to last year? They said last year the ethanol industry used about 5 billion bushel. So we're going to use a little bit more this year, according to the USDA, for ethanol. Exports, last year, exports were 2.7 billion bushel. This year, the USDA has us at 2.5 billion bushel. So we've talked about the corn from a domestic perspective. This is corn from a world perspective. Corn world ending stocks and also the world stocks to use ratio. It's not a lot different than, excuse me. Yep, okay, here's the one. You can see here, it is lower than some of the previous years. So from a world perspective, we're not going to run out of corn this year, domestically or in the world. I mean, you can see here that the world ending stocks, there's grain out there, but the job of the market is to slow down usage and to encourage production when this stocks to use ratio starts to decline. There are and have been years where world stocks to use ratios, you can see, have maybe even been tighter. So from a historical perspective, we have more corn out there than we've had in previous years. But with some of the things that have gone on abroad over in the Ukraine and Russia, there almost appears to be a greater desire for food security, a greater desire to that we need probably a little extra grain at our disposal just because of some of that unknown. So I think some of our price movement here the last 3 months can be attributed to the war in Russia and Ukraine, and just kind of that desire to encourage production because where this war is going on is in a highly productive region. Think of it like the Iowa of Europe. And there's a lot of unknowns there. And I'm sure some of you have seen some different presentations about, the estimates of whether Ukraine will grow a crop or won't grow a crop, or will they be able to export the one they have. I'm of the opinion that there's a lot of unknown. There isn't too many people last fall that were predicting this conflict. None of us are going to be able to predict exactly when it's going to end and how it's going to end. But because of that risk and the unknown, commodity prices have definitely responded to the higher. So for those of you out there, and this chart here is going to apply to byproducts just like it would if you have corn to market. This here is a December corn seasonal chart. So if you would take the last 20 years of December corn futures, combine them all together, on average, we produce peaks in the corn market, or some of the more expensive byproducts that we pay for are going to be in this springtime. And the reverse is true. Some of the cheaper times and to lock in byproducts, to buy corn if you're feeding whole corn, is going to be in this fall time period. And the reason the seasonal and grains tends to continue to persist is we plant our corn in this time period and we harvest it in this time period, and so we tend to have more abundant supplies here. We have a lot of unknown here. Will we have a drought year? And that leads us to about June 10th. And so even this year, with all the unknown out there abroad, including the unknown of our drought this year, we tend to put our peaks in this early summer time period. If we had to provide a roadmap, a best guess, a forecast, year in and year out, this historically has been a really good roadmap to follow. There are years that counter this. Like 2012 would have been a drought year. That was a year that looked the exact opposite of this. But more times than not, we get the crop planted. More times than not, enough rain does show up to produce a decent sized crop. And that leads us to the market starting to take risk premium out. And somewhere around the 1st of October, we tend to forage a harvest low. Soybeans, some of our byproducts are not just based on the corn market, they're also based on the soy complex. Last year, we planted around 87.2 million acres of soybeans. This year, the USDA estimates that we're going to plant 91 million acres of soybeans. We talked before about the date of that these were published in the planting intentions report. Since then, corn has probably become for most a more profitable crop to grow. There's a likelihood that we see a decrease in this number of some sort, and maybe an increase in our corn acreage. Last 2 years, we've had really good bean yields. We've had 51 and 51.4 bushels per acre. And that has produced, last year, it produced, again, one of our larger, in fact, it would be our largest soybean crop that we've ever produced as a nation. 4.44 billion bushels of soybeans. So the soybean complex is elevated, just like the corn complex and the wheat complex, but it didn't come because we didn't have a good crop last year.
So gentlemen, we had a question come in earlier today.
Yes.
We encouraged people to do that. And they would like to have a little discussion about what's happening in Brazil and how that's affecting our soybean market.
What's happening in Brazil and how that's affecting our soybean market.
Yes,
Is there any more detail to that question? Are they talking about from a longer term perspective, like from the last 5 to 10 years? and
yes,
just kind
it's
of
a
the
long-term
macro
perspective.
changes?
Yeah, about a long-term perspective of what Brazil's doing with
Yeah.
soybeans.
Okay, so longer term perspective, I don't have the exact date in front of me. I don't have any of that data in front of me, but I just know it from my recollection. Big picture, 10 years ago, we used to be the world's largest producer of soybeans. We gave up that title approximately 5 years ago. South America is the world's largest producer of soybeans. So the Southern Hemisphere has taken over the lead in producing soybeans in the world. Their markets, their weather, whether they get their crop planted, whether they have a drought, has a lot more impact on our prices today than it used to in the past. And that's not going to change. I believe this year they lost about another 1 million acres of, I shouldn't say lost, maybe that's not putting it the best way, but they will add 1 million acres of production down there. So they have areas that they can continue to expand into. And with Brazil's current president, he's very pro-agriculture and wants to continue to feed the world. And in the years to come, they will continue to be a larger and larger competitor. And their growing season being, a lot of it's the opposite of ours. Their weather is definitely going to impact our markets a lot more than it did 10 years ago. Does that answer your question, Bonita?
Thank you. I think that does answer the question.
Good question. A quick run through the supply and demand balance sheet. Maybe pointing out just a few things here. Again, in the previous slides showed how many acres that we planted, how many bushels we grew, and our total production. So again, it was a good production year last year. You can see here a couple things you can extrapolate from this table. The crushing, turning soybeans from a whole soybean into soybean meal and soybean oil has ramped up in the US. We're now crushing around 2.2 billion bushels compared to, if you go back to 13, 14, there's this number is slowly increasing. That number is going to increase in the future. For those of you that aren't aware that there is a large intention to expand crush capacity. We've had somewhere around 400 to 450 million bushel of proposed additional crush capacity in this country. And if that is all built and if that all comes online, this number's going to go up. The future for the soybean farmer or those that grow soybeans looks pretty good. Time will tell if it can materialize, but I kind of like to describe it as think of the ethanol boom. Only this is going to be what they refer to as the renewable diesel boom, and this is going to be a little different than soy diesel. This is what's known as renewable diesel, and I won't get into detail on the difference between those too. But it's exciting for ag and should definitely add some demand in the years to come. It's not there today. It's not going to be there next year. But in the years to come, we're going to talk a lot more about the demand of soybeans increasing. Stocks to usage carryout is 5.3%. How does that compare to years past? You can see here that 2016 through 2019, we had some years where we had 10 and 22% stocks to use ratio. So we're much lower. Exports has really picked up, probably the largest thing that picked up. For several years, we did not export many beans to China. And then all of a sudden they showed up at our doorstep and started buying beans again. So again, the most commonly question we're asked, well, what does all that data mean to, are prices going up or prices going down? This is the best roadmap that we can put in front of people. More times than not, we get the crop planted in the spring. More times than not, enough rain does show up to produce a crop. And again, more times than not, we put in a low in the soybean complex around October 5th. So both the corn and the soybean seasonal chart have a spring and summer high followed by a fall low. The byproducts, again, the reason why we're talking about grains so much, the byproducts are going to follow a similar pattern. This is all wheat acres. This year we planted 47.4 million acres of wheat in the country. This is last year's wheat. Different than corn and beans, we did not grow our largest wheat crop last year. In fact, we grew the smallest wheat crop in the United States over the last 10 years. Wheat is probably the leader of the grain complex. Today, for those of you that are watching the markets, we had a significant move higher in wheat just in one day. So it's become extremely volatile. 60, 70 cent move is can sure happen easily on a day in the wheat market. Some of that is coming on the fact of we grew the smallest wheat crop in 10 years last year.
Gentlemen, we have a question if you'd like to look at the Q&A.
The question is from Cody W. I think I might know who Cody W is. He says, do you see a second seasonal developing for soybeans based on South American production? Cody, I think your question is South America continues to become the leader and produces more soybeans, will that seasonal chart start to change? And the answer is yes. If I would show you, if I would go back and crunch data and just look at some of those changes, yes, it starts to show, has started to show some differences. And probably a big picture of what it starts to show is when we're most concerned about weather, when we're most concerned about moisture in North America, is in that June, middle of the growing season time period. South America is most concerned at about the same time, only it's during their need for moisture and rain. And so what we're starting to see on soybeans over time is we're almost starting to see two peaks and valleys on a seasonal soybean chart. And that's starting to become apparent, probably will more so in the future. And that's just based on we're growing two crops of soybeans instead of just one.
answer live. I think you just did that.
Cody, if that doesn't answer your question, ask it a different way, but I think that's what you were asking. Here's wheat. The stocks to use ratio, again, kind of being the number that we really want to watch. On wheat here, you can see that compared to some of the past years being in the 50s, middle 50s for stocks to use ratio, we're definitely lower than that. And again, back to some of the world things impacting the wheat market, what's going on over in Russia and Ukraine is probably the most relevant to our wheat market. Again, those areas over there are known as the breadbasket of Europe. They're very large wheat producing areas, and just the unknown that all comes with that is probably adding to the concern, as we had one of the smaller crops in the last 10 years in North America.
So gentlemen, again, we had a question come in earlier today. This person had listened to a presentation by the World Food Program, which is a branch of the United Nations and feeds a lot of people around the world. They said that they're spending an extra $70 million a month because they can't get the grain out of Ukraine. How is that going to impact the wheat market here in the United States?
Well, if there is wheat sitting in Ukraine that is not, it might be sitting over there, but it's not accessible. It's not for sale. It's kind of an unknown of how you build that into a balance sheet. It might be unavailable today, but a change in that conflict might make it available 30 days from now. And so it's in the world. Ending stocks, yet we don't quite put data together for grain that's sitting somewhere that is, think of it as locked up temporarily. It could even turn into a situation over there if it goes on long enough where some of that grain starts to go out of condition, and to answer the question is it's probably a hard question to answer just because there's a lot of unknown, but to answer that question based on today, if there's less supply out there for countries to buy, it elevates our price. It makes our price worth more because if you can't buy it over there and you need it, you got to buy it somewhere. And yeah, so maybe the short answer is that it adds to the price risk for North America.
Thank you.
I might kind of work through some of these slides here a little faster. I just want to make sure we got some time for questions at the end. Another reason for wheat price to be concerned right now is we are in the growing season for wheat more than our corn and our soybean crops. This year's wheat crop that was planted is not in the best shape. What you're looking at here is crop progress and crop condition for winter wheat for this year. These are ratings that the USDA publishes. Many of you have probably heard the good to excellent rating. That's kind of the benchmark, the better looking acres they call good to excellent. And you can see here in 2022, This is one of the lowest national crop condition scores that we've had for our wheat in a long time. Some of that's coming from just we did not have adequate moisture throughout the winter. And so the other concern in the wheat crop for this year is it's just not in very good shape compared to the previous years. Here's 2019, here's 2020, and you can see here that we're considerably lower. I also put up a sorry, I'm trying to get to the top of my screen.
Hit the chat button again and clear it out.
Does that clear it?
Just so close.
There it went. Okay, my apologies. So I also pulled a few states here just to kind of see, because if you look at Kansas's crop condition, you'll see that it's that there is a year that it was actually poorer than where we are today. One of the worst here, I pulled Colorado's. Yeah, so probably if you remember the first slide we put up with the drought condition, the further west you get, the more severe the drought. Colorado's wheat crop is in much poorer shape than Kansas's, but nationally, one of the lower crop condition scores that we've seen. This is a seasonal chart for wheat. We tend to put in highs in the wheat market in February and March, and then sell off into about a harvest low. This year, most of it coming on account of just poor crop ratings and a conflict abroad in Europe's wheat belt. This chart has not had a drop off. In fact, we've continued to climb higher. As we know more about our wheat crop this year, the concerns may subside a little from where we are today. But right now today, the markets are pricing in a worst case scenario. I'm going to turn it over to Kenny. He's going to talk a little bit about the ethanol complex and a little more specific on the byproducts.
Thanks, Jed. As Jed said, my name's Ken Prinz. I'm a feed merchandiser for our company. I've actually been doing this for about 15 years. And so I started right in on the beginning of the ethanol boom and have been through some of the cycles here. I'm just going to kind of do an overview of the ethanol industry and the byproduct industry quick. And then we'll get into a couple little things about the maybe specific to some drought and things we can look at. So just a couple slides here to begin with on the ethanol industry. Typically ethanol stocks are going to peak out in quarter one seasonally, and that's typically when ethanol margins are your worst for the ethanol plant. Summer into quarter four are usually the lowest stocks, obviously more driving, maybe some less production. And so your margins are typically the best in your fall and winter time periods for your ethanol plants. You can see some of the trends there on that chart. Obviously, the one that sticks out is, and you're going to see that a lot throughout this, is 2019 into the spring of 2020, and that was COVID, when we had a lot of supply chain issues for the ethanol plants and a lot of shutdowns on the plants. So this is just production, kind of same thing. You can see seasonally, it's at its weakest right now. We're coming off of a lot of plant preventative maintenance, which is done typically in the spring and then again later in the fall. Lower negative margins in the late winter, early spring, and that usually holds run rates a little lower on these plants. September is typically when they do their second set of preventative maintenance, kind of lines up with tight corn supplies right before harvest. Some of these plants try and time it around that to help out with some corn purchases and things as well. Right now, cash margins are decent in ethanol. You're looking at about 20 cents a gallon, roughly, give or take a little. Those were really high back in Q4. You know, we were talking 70 cents a gallon on average. Some cases were $1 or over. But that Q1 of this year, the spring before recently, some of those were down around 0 or even negative. Poor rail performance, slowing some plant run rates. I'll talk about that again here in a little bit. Just we've had some trouble getting ethanol cars moved, and that's had to have some of these plants restricted on their run times. Also, the rail performance, regional corn basis, things like that will dictate plant performance based on regions. We have an example there. South Dakota has a lower production from last year's drought up there, and their yield variations on the plants are definitely showing that. So we'll get into the byproducts a little bit. I'm probably going to talk mostly about the big three, I'll call them, which is your corn-based ethanol byproducts of wet distillers, WDGS, modified wet distillers, and dry distillers. Over the years, we've seen a long-term shift, and this is one thing that I really have watched, and we've talked a lot about in our company and our business. We've seen a long-term shift from a supply-based price market to a demand-based price market. What I mean by that is, you know, when the ethanol boom started and back in 10 to 15 years ago, we were making a lot more byproducts than what we were using. And so you saw a cheaper feed stuff. You saw wider variation of corn. And because we physically didn't have the demand to use up the supply. Over the years, we have shifted that to where today, most of it's a supply, demand-based market. We have more demand than what we typically produce on the byproducts. There's some seasonality to it, obviously, but we're typically seeing a higher demand than what we actually can make. Some of that's from increased beef demand, higher usage and more inclusion, higher inclusion rates in the feed yards, more cow-calf producers and backgrounders using it. Used to be you had to be a large producer to use the byproducts. We figured out a lot of ways to use wet feeds and dry feeds and be able to keep them and store them and just use them in many different size operations. Anybody that's got a 20 head cow herd to a 50,000 head feedlot. Other livestock sectors, we've seen a large increase in the demand for dry distillers from the swine industry and the poultry industry. And so as they've utilized these products more, that's brought in more demand. Exports have been a big thing. People always ask about exports. I have a slide coming up here next that'll kind of show some numbers on that. So exports on the dry distillers products has become a large part of our demand in our market. And there's a few non-traditional uses out there. There's a few plants around, a few places around that are taking distillers type products and making them into other things. I believe there's a plant in Nebraska here that has used some dry distillers to make some plastic type products, some styrofoam type products and things like that. Another thing we've seen is wear and tear and aging on some of the plants. Kind of our running saying in our office is the 10-year, 100,000-mile warranties are running up on a lot of these places. They're getting older. And so you're seeing a lot of more breakdowns, unexpected breakdowns and maintenance times to deal with some of that, to fix parts and some pumps will go bad and bearings and things like that we're just starting to see as these plants get older. Back to, we said something about some rail logistics on the ethanol slides. Same thing here. One thing we've ran into the last 2 to 3 years, and really in the last year, it's been a big thing, a big issue, is railroads turnaround time on ethanol cars for these plants at the railroads. They're not moving them back and forth fast enough. You've seen some of these turnaround times maybe double from what they were. And so a plant only has so much storage in its facility. So if it doesn't get a train in on time, it has to slow its production down or even cease production unexpectedly so they don't overfill their ethanol tanks. Here's a chart on DDG exports going back to 2007. Dry distillers grains. This is to all buyers. And you can see that we've grown those exports quite a little bit. You see we had the drought in 2012 and our exports really went up after that. And what happened there is that's about the time that China came in and started buying. 2012 to 2016, we sold a lot of dry distillers grains to China. We had heavy exports over there. However, 2017 till now, we've essentially had zero exports or very few exports of DDGs to China due to some of their anti-dumping, some of the trade and tariff issues. However, the intriguing thing to me is over that time frame, we found more buyers. So you see that during that time period, even with China not buying, we've still held exports between 10 and 12 million metric tons per year. 2022 on this particular chart, this is from USDA, they only had data entered up till the end of January. So that data lags. 2022 probably, as you look at it, will be a similar type of export year. Getting into a few historical things here on these different products. This is a chart about on wet distillers grains, and I have one of these for wet and modified and dry. Just varies depending on your location in the state and location from the plant as maybe to which one's the best for your operation. One thing you can see, this data goes back to 2007. This is actual plant data that we've compiled over the years as an average price. And this is on a value to corn versus the Board of Trade. And what you can see with that green trend line is we've increased from 2007, our average value to corn was somewhere around 80%, probably depending on the time of year. And now we're up closer to 92 to 95% value to corn. So over the years, we have slowly increased the value to corn, made byproducts more expensive versus corn than what they were before. It's continued to strengthen. Even we've seen some oil get pulled out of these distillers and the product change feed value wise, but the value to corn has still tended to increase. One other thing you'll see from these charts, you'll see as over the last 4 years, we see a lot more volatility, a lot higher spikes, some lower lows. Those are due to a number of things. You have seen, you saw the floods in 2019 that really shot some prices up because of lost production at the plants. You saw COVID in 2020. We've had multiple things have been thrown at this industry over the last few years.
So gentlemen, a question came in earlier today. How is the new RFL changing the outlook of this?
I don't know that we know how it's going to change it yet. I think that you'll see with that new RFL, these plants are going to continue to produce. So we're still going to have lots of production in the ethanol. But I think the demand is going to be there enough that I don't know that I see these trends changing a lot. I think could we flatten them out a little bit potentially, but the value in this distillers is being realized by a lot of different sectors. Same chart, just on modified wet distillers, same trend basically from 80 to right about 100% value to corn. It just these products have been following the same type of trend. Here's one for dry distillers. The one thing you'll notice on dry is there's probably a lot higher peaks and a lot lower valleys. Well, not necessarily lower valleys, but for sure higher peaks. That coincides with the strength in exports. If you look where that starts, 2012-13, value to corn got a lot stronger. that's about when our export boom started and we started moving a lot more of these products. The dry distillers can flow farther because of the less moisture it's got. It can be used more in hogs. It can be used more in poultry. So those things all affect that. And different livestock sectors have a different tolerance for how much they'll pay for things. Some of these other livestock sectors, their tolerance to go up to 140% the price of corn is maybe more than some of the beef operations, because the beef operations have some different options we can use.
Kenny, before you go off that, I guess I have a question.
Okay.
So based on this chart here that you're looking at, how can somebody protect themselves when byproducts go to 160% the value to corn, and how can they gain advantage when byproducts might be trading at 60 or 70% the value to corn? How can I think anybody using byproducts would love to buy them all at 60% the value to corn. Saves us a lot of money. Can you give a short example of how we can do that?
So one thing we can do is think of similar to buying corn. If you're buying corn for your operation, you want to buy it at the widest basis possible. The value to corn is your basis in distillers. The lower that value to corn is, the wider your basis is. So the cheaper you can buy it, if you can buy it, the best thing you can do is buy it down here at 60% if you get the opportunity. Today, those opportunities are rare, but even if you can get down here into the 80% range, if you have the opportunity to buy it there, your chances, and I got a few slides here coming up that'll also show the yearly trends, but your chances of that market increasing over the year is a lot better. So if you want to protect yourself, it's real easy. We can use corn futures to protect that basis level. You can buy it at a wide basis, use corn futures to protect that, and then price it out to your operation throughout the year. So just kind of some points on those slides, your overall trends. You know, all these products have increased in their value to corn relationship, tightening of the basis. I went through the causes of a few of the spikes and what those things did and how they jumped the value to corn. We've had some volatile grain prices, continued strong demand on products, some run rate issues with these plants, and changing processes and products. We've taken oil out of some of these products. We're putting on some add-on parts to the backside to do some more high protein fiber extraction at some of these plants. And so we're in a changing time of period in this market, and things are definitely gonna adjust. A couple quick slides pertaining to the drought. Here is the red line is a 5-year average. The black dotted line is a 2012 chart. I thought that'd be pertinent for the drought. The orange line is current markets. These are on a flat price on a dry matter basis. You're going to see a similar trend on all three of these products. What we typically do in a normal year is we peak out in about May on our prices right now. And as cattle go to grass and feed yard pens start to empty out, we see that decline through the summertime. And your low is typically in the July to end of August timeframe. So if we can be buying these byproducts at that time frame, and whether it's stockpiling them or contracting them, depending on what the plants will let us do, that's the time where we really want to be looking to buy them and take advantage of some of those pricing things. And then they increase through the fall and winter and spring when the demand is the heaviest. 2012, we saw that trend start in the early spring, and then we hit about the middle to end of June, and we realized it wasn't probably going to rain, and we were running out of grass, and things went straight higher and basically stayed that way, and then fell through the fall a little bit when we started to get some moisture and we started to figure some things out. You can see the orange line trend this year seems to be following the historical average. Obviously, we're higher priced due to the corn prices, and competing feedstuffs, but the last 2 weeks. This data is updated as of this week. And so you can see where we're starting to hit that peak and fall off. And it looks like we'll continue to do that, especially with some of the moisture we've gotten. Time will tell. Same thing for the modified. This is a same trend for that. You'll see the same basic story. Dry distillers, they all have a little variation, but they're all following the same trend lines. So like I said, with that recent range allows to see some typical seasonal trend in the near term. As far as cattle getting some grass, at least for a while, we'll start to see maybe some lower demand and these things start to fall off price-wise now. Hopefully we can utilize those pastures for longer, but at least for a little bit here. We're seeing typical fat cattle movement out of the yards. There's also some lower trending prices on soybean meal and some competing protein sources that'll help put some pressure on these corn byproducts. So just a couple things real quick here about what we'd be looking at in different situations. If we have adequate moisture, what do we see happening with these prices? I think it'll follow a normal seasonal trend. We'll have some lower demand throughout the summer months, and that should pressure the prices. We should be watching for some stockpile opportunities mid to late summer when it's typically the lowest, and see when those fall contract offers start showing up and look at taking advantage of those. If the spigot shuts off and we continue to be dry, what do we think is going to happen? We can see some early weaning and some supplementation to some of the cow herd and yearlings and backgrounding cattle due to the grass shortage. We may see more of a June low like what we did in 2012. And so that's where we really want to be cognizant and watching if there's some opportunities to purchase some feedstuffs here in the near term as we get into June, some stockpile opportunities, or at least getting if we feel like the value is good and we're worried about grass supplies and things, let's get some products in hand, figure out a way to stockpile them, and at least have some kind of feedstuffs tied up. Even if we have to do a couple different piles or a couple different purchases, that's something we want to be looking at. Other feedstuff opportunities in 2012, the west or the eastern corn belt was still fairly wet. They had a pretty decent crop. So the prices in the east were better. So we actually hauled a lot of gluten pellets were mostly produced over in Iowa. We hauled a lot of those our direction in Nebraska, Western Kansas, and utilize those. Those are a little lower protein, lower fat products. So they're very good for especially for growing and maintaining cattle. Soybean meal, depending on some of the other sectors and things going on, soybean meal is a thing we can look at for good protein and high protein needs. Soy hulls for fiber, wheat midds for fiber, just some of those other types of products. Typically this year, the one challenge may be some freight on some of these products coming from farther away with fuel prices the way they are. But it's going to be a case by case basis we're going to have to look at. There may be some contract prices coming out. There may not with the volatility. It's going to be really interesting to see how it all works out. You're looking at, today current values, depending on where you're located, I'd call central Nebraska 280 to 290 on dry distillers. Those gluten pellets today are probably delivered central Nebraska a little over 300. We'll see how that fluctuates throughout the year. Soy hills have been strong with the fiber market, but 230 to 250 delivered depending on where the location's actually at, and kind of the same type in wheat midds. So that kind of gives an idea of where things are at. With that, I think we're pretty close on time. I don't know if there's any other questions.
I hit the clicker.
This is our disclaimer. We're required to include this in anytime we present anywhere. And then with that, if anybody has any questions,
So if anyone has any questions, please type them in quickly. So we're not seeing any new questions coming in, guys. We're going to wrap it up for the evening. Boy, great information. Thank you, guys. And I'm going to turn it over to Jessie Rudolph as she wraps us up for tonight.
Thanks, Mel, and thank you everyone again for joining us tonight. We have another webinar in this series, and that webinar is on May 17th, again at 8 p.m. So we would love it if you all join us for that one to wrap up this series. Also, if you are not a current member of Nebraska Cattlemen, we would love to have you join as a member, and you can do so on our website. Also, as you exit this webinar, there's going to be a quick survey, and we would love it if you fill that out. It's immensely helpful for us if you fill out surveys so we can continue to provide content. Thank you. And thank you to the current members. We really appreciate your membership.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.